to welcome our panelists to come on camera and come off mute because we're going to begin with a round of introductions. So we can share this, who you are, what agency you represent or organization, and what it is that you do there. That'll be how we kick today off. Ross, I saw you on first, so let's hear from you first.
Hi, Kirsten. It's great to be here with you again. Great to be at ATARC events. I'm Ross Ford. I work for the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. I'm a senior engineer there, and I'm an ICAM SNE. And I'm also the government co-chair of the Identity and Access Management Working Group here at ATARC. And finally, I'm a member of the CDM program, have been since near its inception. So it's really great to be here to talk about that and what we think CDM will look like in the future. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And let's go to Martin next.
Hi, good afternoon. I am Martin Rieger. I am the Chief Solutions Officer at Stack Armor. I come from both a Navy background and a third-party assessment organization background, supporting advisory and assessment for things like FSMA, FedRAMP, RMF, and supporting government agencies implementing solutions like Zero Trust.
Thank you, Martin. And Rudolph, let's hear from you. You're muted.
I'm sorry about that. I'm Rudolph Rojas. I'm with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Farm Production and Conservation Division. We're based out of Kansas City, Missouri. Our team is tasked with maintaining infrastructure, hardware applications, and security for a lot of the websites within the USDA agency. There are 4 in particular. My background is technology. I've worked for several Silicon Valley companies before coming to the government about 5 years ago. So technology has always been my interest, as well as program and project management. Right now, we're making a big effort to maintain security in light of all the recent threats. So I'm spearheading a team that includes a heavy security program as well.
Great, fantastic. Well, really excited to have you all here. I noticed my laptop is lagging a little bit, so I apologize if there's a stall. Hopefully it'll be okay for the next hour. But let's start with our first question, and we don't have to keep going in any particular order necessarily, but I'll just go back around to Ross to kick things off. So Ross, I'd love if you could talk to our audience about how the CDM program evolved since its inception to keep agencies ahead of today's advanced threats. And then we'll hear from each of our panelists to contribute to that conversation.
That's really a great question, Kirsten. CDM has evolved quite a bit over the past, almost, I guess, 10 years it's been in existence now. I'll highlight some of those ways. So the original orders on CDM were delivery orders. So we bought products for agencies to implement. But soon after that, those orders were executed. We started with called phase 1 of CDM, and those phase 1 task orders included integration services as well as products. And the first ones were focused on the HWAM, SWAM, vulnerability management, configuration settings management. Not long after those were well underway, I think they've been underway for about 1.5 years or 2 years, when phase 2 was introduced. And phase 2 was the identity and access management capabilities. And those include trust, cred, behave, and priv. And what is interesting is, even as they were producing the phase 2 capabilities, the OPM breach happened, there was a cyber sprint, and they asked CDM to accelerate priv management capabilities to help agencies address privilege users, which had been identified as a weakness in the cyber sprint. So priv management actually came before cred management for the phase 2 task orders. And they were very short-term task orders. They're very broad, but they were able to establish some capabilities within the federal government. And I want to take my hat off to Rudolph, because USDA was already one of the handful of agencies that was really well suited to take what CDM was doing. Actually, it was already on the journey for doing the kind of things he wanted to do, and has been a leader the whole time in executing identity and access management capabilities on CDM. So that didn't stop our innovation, because the current task orders that are now coming to an end are called Defend. And in Defend, there was a continuing evolution, right? One of the most interesting evolutions was the introduction of ADR tools. These are the endpoint detection and response tools. This was along with the lines of CDM to try to become more operational. In the first implementations of CDM, I would say we had more of a compliance focus than we do now, which is more of an operational capabilities focus, right? So along with that, tools like the ADR tools are very helpful in helping be operationally relevant. At the same time, the scale of CDM program and the scale of the task at hand really was evidenced, and we moved our dashboard from a certain structure to what we call the elastic stack, and including in many cases, we've delivered that stack as a service. So there's been just a ton of evolution in the core CDM program itself. And the last thing I want to say, all along on CDM, we've had a shared service, and this shared service has taken advantage of, multi-tenant service capabilities be delivered primarily for agencies that are not CFO Act agencies, those that have a more difficult time bringing really full capabilities to bear. But the ability for the shared service to deliver capabilities has really been one of the things that has helped CDM see how can we move into the future with with our services and deliver through service delivery model. So it's been a really great journey. I'm really pleased to be on the program. Couldn't have picked a better place to be for the last for me 8 years.
Great, thank you. Rudolph, would you like to add anything to that?
Well, I'd really like to thank Ross because I had no idea that there was such a close collaboration between CISA and USDA, but because I'm around USDA technologies all the time, but we use the ICAMs, of course, religiously. We use multi-factor authentication. We use a lot of tools that protect the edge and scan the sites and the server. So it's a whole plethora of tools and applications and actual processes that come from CISA that we would have been out of luck if we hadn't implemented those. So I will say that we run a tight ship here. We use, for example, a tool called Akamai on our front end as well, and we're advocating that for, and not to play a commercial for them, but one of the tools that we use is to protect our edge computers and our edge servers. And as a result of using these technologies, we haven't had a incursion or any kind of DDoS for many years. And we also we employ exercises on a regular basis for the actual users. We have thousands of users, and so, for example, we'll run a phishing exercise on email and get statistics on that to see how things are going, and our numbers are coming down on an annual basis as people become more educated. We also utilize training as part of the annual review process to train on these issues and security. So yeah, I mean, we're definitely taking advantage of a lot of what you provide, and we're very thankful for that. I just didn't realize how much until recently.
Very cool. And then Martin, I'd love to open it up to you next.
Yeah, thank you. And definitely my hat's off to both Ross and Rudolph. Over the years here at Stack Armor, we've worked with both agencies and at the USDA developing a cybersecurity center of excellence as well for adoption of these types of technologies to, one, increase that operational visibility. So, you have things like the Federal Civilian Executive Branch, who, CISA operators now have greater visibility for more effective risk mitigation before breaches even occur. The automated data sharing components, I think that have developed over the last decade are fantastic in support of those CDM dashboards. But even more so, one area I think that it's had a great impact as well is to reduce an agency's threat surface and also increase visibility into the cybersecurity posture of the solutions and technologies that are being used for cybersecurity response capabilities. So, the results being a little bit more streamlined process for things like FISMA reporting, FedRAMP reporting, and assistance with that sort of added layer of cybersecurity that I think sometimes a lot of folks don't always think about it, but an interesting statistic that was provided by the GSA the other day included that 60% of those cybersecurity budgets are spent on the compliance aspects, and it's easy to overlook this portion. So definitely hats off to you guys.
Mhm. All right. Well, I'm going to call for a quick poll question up on the screen. So audience at home, if you're paying attention, poll question number 1 is up, and you will want to respond to this. Which of the following are identity capabilities within CDM? So please take a moment to select your answer. But moving right along to our next question now. Rudolph, I'd love to start with you on this one. I want to ask, what makes identity foundational for modernizing cybersecurity in the government? If you could please speak to that.
Sure. Well, from a basic standpoint, I guess identity management is like one of the crux pillars, right? You don't want to have everybody obviously accessing all kinds of data or accessing different protected services or servers or whatever the case might be. So yeah, I mean, that's definitely one of the primary goals of our organization is to make sure that identity is well documented, and the roles of every individual is known and what their responsibilities are. So it's kind of a basic tenet of security, starting at the very foundation with access to the networks or access to applications or even access to VPNs, wherever the case might be. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, thank you. Let's bounce back over to Ross. Do you have anything else to add?
Well, when I think I agree with, obviously, with Rudolph, when I try to explain the centrality of identity and access management to security in general, I start out by saying there's really a single principle in security, and that is you have subjects and they are trying to get access to objects, and you have to control who can have access to those objects. And that pattern is repeated over and over and over again in every part of our architecture. And so one of the things I really, really like about Zero Trust is it is a desire to use those principles as often as you can, as close as you can to the place that you're accessing the resources, right? So in the past, when we started this kind of internet network journey, we kind of built a big perimeter around everything. We said everything inside of it's going to be safe and secure. We'll just keep the bad guys out and the good guys in. But of course, in the network world, with so many different interactions between systems, it was really early on not easy to do. And in the 90s, in the mid 90s, we really knew already that we were having trouble figuring out how to secure our internal environments. And by the 2000s, it was really pretty clear that the perimeter was dissolving. And as a result of that, Zero Trust architectures have emerged to help us do more purposeful decisions being made at points in the environment, whether they're external environments or internal environments.
Thank you, Ross. And then back over to you, Martin.
Absolutely. So, when it comes to what I would say is the foundation, right? As Ross kind of mentioned, it's central and integral to the security, but in terms of supporting Zero Trust, modern identity security aligns greatly with these principles of what we call a Zero Trust architecture, which back in 2018 is really when NIST kind of took a foothold. It goes back a little further than that, but Now, what we've ultimately ended up with in 2024 is an approach that is essential for safeguarding against one, over provisioning resources, orphaned accounts, and things that can create significant risks. It also enables digital transformation. So, a secure identity is necessary for digital government services so that they can have the confidence and the ability for individuals to access services and benefit from those services in a secure manner. One of the greatest outcomes we've seen is a reduction in fraud and identity theft by securing personal data within both online and government agency resources. Having a zero trust architecture and those types of components in there are basically paving the way in terms of protecting individuals in the community at large. So in essence, it's not just a component of security. From our perspective, it's the gateway to ensuring that all the other security measures remain effective, right? So we can add all kinds of security controls around how we deploy and protect and monitor and maintain. But if we don't have a trustworthy digital infrastructure to make sure that those who have access, if compromised, don't prevent bad actors from gaining access to information they shouldn't, then the rest of it's kind of out the door.
And I want to talk a little bit about that ecosystem and expand it a little bit beyond. In CDM, we were pretty fortunate. We look primarily as employees and contractors, and the government has a really strong mechanism of vetting people before they give them a credential. But I'll just say this, it's not generally true for a lot of organizations outside of the federal government. And that is one of the areas that, Marty mentioned fraud. That's one of the areas that fraud has been exercised, is by pretending to be somebody who you really aren't, getting credentials and then being able to use credentials within an environment. So kind of early in the process that NIST calls the identity proofing process is an area that every organization needs to be vigilant at. And like I said, the federal government's done a really good job of that over the years. So, yeah.
Thank you, Ross. Any other comments from the panelists before we move on? Right, awesome. And I just want to remind our audience too that we are going at a great pace. So if you do have any questions, feel free to send them in and we'll chat about them. But moving right along now, AI certainly makes for some splashy headlines. Martin, I want to start with you first. I want to talk about the practical uses for AI today when it comes to improving cyber posture, and especially as that relates to identity and access management and cyber defenses. If you could kick us off with chatting about that next.
Absolutely. So, artificial intelligence, it does have several practical applications to improving things like cybersecurity posture, especially in the realm of identity and access management when it comes to things like cyber defenses. So, one of the what I would say is most significant uses is anomaly detection, right? So, algorithms that can analyze behavior patterns, detect anomalies that might perhaps indicate a security threat, such as unusual login times and locations. The NIST 853 in each of the frameworks, such as FISMA, RMF, or FedRAMP, already had provisions that stated, you need to establish set sort of working hours and periods like that, and be able to detect when someone perhaps is coming in at 4 a.m. in the morning and downloading gigs of data when they normally work 9 to 5 and maybe only download 100 megs or so, or something along those lines. Well, human beings, that's a daunting task, even with scripted capabilities and automation. Well, AI's ability to do that, can greatly enhance our ability to not only detect it, but respond to it. So from an automated threat response perspective, in terms of detection and speeding up things like incident resolution and the overall workload that incident response teams have to carry, there's a lot of work being done right now to enhance that. The last thing is what I would say that we're observing in the marketplace is advanced authentication methods. So like biometrics, where the AI can identify a user based on their interactions with devices. And we're not just talking about things like facial recognition and your thumbprints or voice prints, but how you type, the speed in which you type, the way you enter those keys. So if I were to throw one more in there, phishing detection is quickly becoming a big market, using AI to detect phishing attempts, where by analyzing email content, behavior, text, things like that, that we spend a lot of time, money, energy, and effort throughout the United States government providing awareness and training and trying to teach people to recognize those unusual characters. Don't click on that if you don't know who it's from. Those types of things can be filtered out in a way that saves us all time, energy, money, and effort.
Yeah, absolutely. Rudolph, what about you? Some practical uses that maybe haven't been mentioned or that specifically stand out to you?
Yes, absolutely. Well, as I'm not sure if Ross or Martin mentioned it, the identity management process for onboarding, for example, in government institutions, in particular USDA, takes way too long. You might have 2 months go by before somebody can get a computer or even access to some of the networks, which is good. You got to do that. But I'm thinking AI should be used in robotic process automation as well to maybe expedite these tasks that are kind of drudge work. You got to go out to different agencies. You got to go to different, or even today they're going out to social media and looking at people's accounts. So if we could employ AI and RPA to do some of that drudge work, I think we could get people on board and productive much faster. It's been a point of frustration for us for a long time. And I think, we can definitely start taking advantage of that technology.
Yeah. I think I'll add that automation really, one of the things AI helps do is fuel your ability to use data for automation purposes, right? It's really been, I think, eye-opening for people to see how generative pre-trained transforms. These chat GPTs and other GPTs have really kind of come to the fore in the last couple of years, but there's actually been machine learning algorithms have been, used in behind the scenes capabilities for a number of years. They are advancing very fast, right? And one of the real key things about that is all these things we're talking about here, there's much more data that you can collect and then use. And when you have a machine learning algorithm determining what patterns are normal, that can actually help, as Rudolph said, that can help in the onboarding process and even to ensuring that people, the number of and characteristics of the roles of the groups people have are given appropriately. The machine learning can help suggest, the proper association that people have in the organization. And then after the protection mechanism, after they've logged in, as Marty was saying, mining the logs and the data that's occurring after the fact, right? Determining what patterns of behavior are normal, which ones are abnormal, just through access control behaviors is really very important. And I'll just say the government has really made a big emphasis on collecting information in logs, and those logs have rich information that can help us discover things that are anomalous in the environment. So yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right, we are going to put up our second poll question here. So audience at home, it is up on the screen. Which of the following identity actions are required by the federal zero trust strategy? So please respond to that. And again, if you have any questions of your own you'd like to submit, we are taking questions at this time, but I'll just, did we have one come through? Okay. Neil just wrote in, how are agencies looking at securing AI pipeline in cloud instances as it relates to accelerating AI innovation and AI visibility in the cloud? I will give our panelists a moment to kind of mull that over, and then whoever wants to respond to Neil, feel free to jump on in.
I'm happy to start. So Neil, first, thanks for that question. And you are kind of referencing what I would say is one of the hottest topics throughout the government right now, which is how do we leverage all these great new tools and capabilities that have been under development for the last decade and have now kind of hit the market, such as OpenAI, Bard, ChatGPT, et cetera. There is a working group, which is the RMF for AI working group within NIST, that has responded to the executive order 14110 released last year, which is developing AI for safety to eliminate risks around things like bias, privacy, transparency, and you know, what were the LLMs designed for and who designed them. So it's a little bit wild west right now, and it's not unique to the United States. There are AI risk frameworks being developed around the world, in the UK, for example, as well. And each one around these core elements of security. So the pillars are being developed to basically put in place frameworks that allow the analysis of risk for the AI being proposed to be used, so that the government agencies understand what those potential risks are, the possibility for misuse, and most notably, as I said before, the potential to violate rights or privacy. That being said, at the moment right now, when it comes to AI and visibility in the cloud, you know, there's only one currently authorized, which is OpenAI on Azure. Google and AWS are quickly following suit with that as well. But from an agency looking to secure and add AI pipeline to their mix, I would encourage them to look at the draft that's been developed. There's a handful of tools that are out there in the marketplace that also allow a little bit of an analysis, but where what I would say is kind of where FedRAMP was, or even, you know, RMF and FISMA 20 years ago, we're kind of at that beginning stage where all the policies and the procedures and the approach to onboarding solutions like this are really being developed. So Ross or Rudolph, I don't know if you have anything additional to add.
It's a big topic, right? And
Yeah.
I won't go into all of it. I'll say, I want to say this. At DHS, we have a policy about how we can use GPTs, right? For, you know, within our environment, you have to get trained, you have to get permission to use them, and then you can use them in the environment. And you can't put any information that's sensitive up there, right? But you can use them to help you educate. I think there's a lot of research and development occurring across the federal enterprise, including at DHS, about the right way to use AI safely and in privacy preserving terms too, right? That's very important to DHS. So I don't think I'll go any farther than that right now, but yeah.
Yeah, I'll kind of piggyback on what Ross stated. So, you know, ChatGPT and these LLMs are really only been in play for about a year, I guess, a good year, where they've really taken off, right? And so with USDA, we are using a government hosting center called DISC, and so it's not a commercial hosting cloud center like AWS or Azure, although we are now investigating and putting out pilots of applications and software and services on commercial cloud, which is, you know, FedRAMP and secure, and that might also include PII at some time in the future. So yeah, I mean, at this point, we're really getting into the cloud in a bigger way on the commercial end. Although DISC hosts cloud offerings, obviously, we're looking at you know, different propositions, and in that sense, we're also just beginning to scratch the surface on the capabilities of AI within our own data stores, because USDA has quite a bit of data all over the landscape, technical data, financial data, geospatial. There's a whole plethora of information that USDA provides users. And so we're trying to leverage that so that we can make it accessible, easily accessible to our users who are worldwide, you know, be they farmers, producers, or just plain citizen Jane out in Kansas somewhere who wants to know how to grow a particular crop. So yeah, there's definitely a whole avenue that we need to investigate. And as Ross stated, it's just starting now. We're trying to get our hands around it. It's kind of impossible.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Neil, for sending in that question and our panelists for their responses.
I was gonna, if you had one quick moment, I'll just add one item that currently right now, as he kind of mentioned, agencies are already starting to leverage. One thing that we're observing is the current ATO process. There are AI overlays to add those additional security considerations. So for agencies looking to do this, what we're seeing is folks using the existing ATO processes in place, in some cases air gapping the AI solutions, but there is a demand for a chief AI officer within the agencies. So while those are being created, the CIOs and the CISOs would be supporting. The other is training on AI, and then a continuous monitoring model for AI. So if you're serious about adopting those and adding them, those are just a couple methods that we're seeing folks do right now as well.
Excellent.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so shifting back over to our questions, and again, if the audience has more, we probably have time for those, but send them in sooner rather than later. But I want to shift a little bit over to asking you all, what are some of the main hurdles for cyber modernization in the government? And Ross, maybe we can start with you. What are also some of those practical solutions that are being worked on today?
Well, the main hurdle is there's just so much to be done, right? And so what is needed is growing at an increasing rate. It's growing exponentially, right? So we're going to need to provide, but that gives it both a challenge and an opportunity, right? Because the opportunity lies, as we mentioned earlier, in simply doing things better, finding primitive capabilities that you can use over and over and over again. When you look at, for instance, the zero trust architecture that NIST calls out, it at its essence, it's a fairly simple model, right? Like I mentioned earlier, you have subjects trying to get access to resources, and then you'll make control decisions. They put a lot more emphasis on what goes in those control decisions, right? The federal government has tried to help people understand how you'll be making complex controlled access decisions now by OMB saying that they want to have a device signal along with your access control request. That is something that's readily apparent. I mean, available today that most organizations can do. They can combine signals from their EMMs or their EDR services with access control decisions. And that gives a good starting point for how you make complex control decisions and build a more robust and resilient access control, and just really a modern architecture for your zero trust architecture, right? But if they're trying to help you move from where we are to where we need to be. Of course, part of the complexity is that we're living in a hybrid environment, right? So there'll be a lot of emphasis over the next few years around how to properly manage. And the thing that is the most urgent about hybrid environments, not the only thing, but probably the most urgent, is that you need to consistently manage your users across both of those fabrics, right? And that managing it in the legacy environment has its own inherent risks, right? The way we've been managing with Active Directory on the legacy environment has proven to be something that agencies have had trouble managing well. And although we've done pretty well in the federal government, a lot of customers outside the federal government had a lot more trouble than we have. But then consistently having those users also access services in the cloud. The models are different. The way you access them through kind of a flat network in the local environment, the legacy environment, but you want to have single sign-on services and then session differentiation for where everybody gets access to in the cloud, right? So there are really some very different models, and your identity and access management professionals are going to have to rationalize both of these things. This is another area where I think AI will help us, that it'll be able to draw patterns that are anomalous in the way people from the on-premise environment are accessing the cloud environment. They can look at a lot of different signals and look for pattern normalization. And there's one last thing I'll mention about, kind of what are the practical solutions for doing this modernization is, instead of having static standing access controls, we see people doing one of two things that are very helpful. First is elevation of privileges, so that you might have you as an individual operating in an environment, you might have some low level privileges that are given to you all the time. But when you need to have access to something that's more sensitive, to simply either send a signal to reprove who you are, or to get a different, like a higher factor authenticator to get access to that information. That's one of the techniques. I think the other one I see that's a little more advanced than that is what they call zero standing privileges, where you don't have active privilege accounts anywhere, right? When a person needs to get access to a privileged asset, that the controller does a self-service request. I need access to this thing, and I'll be doing my job for 2 hours. What's really interesting about that, we used to use that technique quite a bit in industry around maintenance operations, because we didn't want the maintenance guys go screwing up with an operation run, right? So you had to get permission, and you had to shut the machine down, and then you could do your maintenance, and we had to reserve those times, right? I think you'll see a lot of those kind of characteristics being done for maintenance operations in the future.
Thank you, Ross. Rudolph, do you have anything you'd like to add to that question?
Yeah, I do. I mean, there are obviously, as Ross mentioned, some serious hurdles with regard to modernization. One of the things that I've seen in the last several years, and that I don't know how rapidly it will be changing, is a reluctance to go on the cloud bandwagon and to put everything that you've got out in the cloud, in the commercial cloud. Just some of the things I just don't see in the immediate future being put out there. For example, if you're the Department of Defense, or you're with, you're in the IRS or whatever, you don't want to have a lot of that technical or really highly privileged data out there in the cloud that although it may be FedRAMP and high secure, et cetera, people are still reluctant to do that, and for good reason too. They want to, some may out of feeling of security, keep it on-prem and manage it there, and that's okay. I think we're evolving now, but that has been a challenge. I mean, there you have different fiefdoms within agencies to saying, well, cloud is the be all end all, commercial cloud that is, or others saying, well, let's invest in some on-prem servers or something like that, and that way we can control the data and so forth. There are all kinds of trade-offs. So that's one of the things I've noticed, and things are changing in that regard. Another thing, of course, is from the individual perspective, from the user perspective. We're still working to get individuals up to speed on cyber security. That's one of the major problems we have in terms of security is vulnerabilities from insider threats or from inside the organization. We need to do a better job of educating people through training, through reinforcing ideas and ideals about security. So that's changing. It's gotten a heck of a lot better in our organization, and I know and probably Martin and Ross could chime in and state that it's gotten better where they're at as well. But that has been a challenge. So yeah, those are two that I would notice at this point that we're working with.
Thank you. And Martin, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, when it comes to the hurdles for modernization in government, and to his point, we've had FedRAMP for 12 years and we still have some of the same problems. We have a resistance to change. We have a lack of a skilled IT workforce who, when it comes to trained professionals who can go off and then deploy the solutions, that we've gone to all this trouble to, for example, get authorized either for use on-prem or in the cloud, that are then, in some cases hampered by budget constraints, right? Limited funding can severely hinder the adoption of new technologies and even cybersecurity tools and capabilities and measures that we greatly need. Like Rudolph mentioned, the security and data privacy concerns regarding protecting sensitive information is probably one of the biggest challenges I think we observe. But in terms of how those things are overcome, well, investing in the staff, right? Like you said, the cybersecurity awareness and training is one aspect of offsetting attacks and things like that, and phishing. But then the biggest thing I think that I've seen helpful in organizations is having a clear vision for modernization. In other words, developing a articulate, clear, strategic vision for how that agency or organization is going to modernize, and then guide those efforts and investments to lead towards that. One thing we've seen, USDA is a great example since you're here, Rudolph, is the way the incremental adopting an incremental modernization of saying, okay, we're not going to boil the ocean or try to do all this at once, but in sort of those bite-sized chunks of things that can be done, sort of in a low-hanging fruit, immediate manner that support the broader changes that you want to make, for example, over a decade or the next 5 years. The last thing, because I'm a cloud guy, so I'm gonna throw it out there, leveraging cloud services, right? These programs have been in place for a long time now. They're designed to streamline workflow and adoption and reduce some redundancies, but kind of like you said earlier, if we can't reach a point where we can trust and protect and educate the workforce on how to use these, then we're going to have a hard time overcoming these barriers that we really need to, so we can enhance the cybersecurity posture of the government agencies.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for sharing your perspectives on that. So I'm going to call for our last poll question, our third and final poll question, and then we're going to answer an audience question before we do our takeaways. So poll question number 3 is up. To reach optimal zero trust maturity, your agency must continuously invalidate identity with phishing resistant MFA, not just when access is initially granted. True, it's a true or false question. So that's our last poll question. And then Ross, I see that you volunteered to answer Dan's question that's come through. I'll just briefly read it for everyone at home. Dan asks, how are agencies considering dealing with the challenges that are associated with establishing and verifying the identity of components of automated systems operating in a zero trust architecture? So Ross, I'll hand it over to you first, and then the other panelists feel free to chime in.
That is such a great, and it's a really loaded question too, Dan. So I'm going to start with the identity aspect for humans, and we talked about that, but I'm going to expand that into devices too, devices and processes, right? So Rudolph talked about robotic process automation, and one of the first questions I had, like I told you, USDA is such a great organization. Their ICAM office asked me if they could use the PAM tools we had to help them with some process automation authentication challenges that they were doing. And it wasn't part of our core requirements at that time, but I went back to the PMO office and I asked them if we could help them with that. And they said yes. And so there are some tools that you can have that can programmatically interject secrets into the process when you're trying to interact with, so that it's not a stored password in some file, which is what we were seeing anti-patterns on, right? There's little ways to do that, but that was just one of the techniques for that. Now, I want to move to, and devices also, we mentioned that getting a device level signal. So you need to know the device is the device you think it is in order to get that signal off it, right? But then I want to move to a little bit to another type. So the components of automated systems these days they're software components, right? If you look at how cloud systems are composed, it's exactly that. They are orchestrated and composed through specifications in software. This software needs to be under configuration control. Components that need to be signed so that they can ensure their integrity. And there's a lot of work going around supply chain risk that will incorporate those kind of techniques, right? Digital signatures, encapsulation to encryption, signing of those encrypted blobs. There's going to be a lot of things that use a lot of the technologies that ICAM professionals are quite well aware of over the years.
Thank you, Ross. And Rudolph or Martin, would either of you like to add to Dan's question?
The one thing I would say is that the question you ask, it does have a lot of challenges, and like Ross said, that's a big question. But you know, I probably would say when it comes to verifying identity components in an automated system, enhanced identity verification, which is basically saying, you know, multi-factor, right, and digital certificates that are addressed to the components that can only interact with the system, along with something like microsegmentation. So dividing the network into smaller secure zones and then controlling access and movement within those, as well as making it easier to manage and identify and verify those identities. Understanding Zero Trust has all kinds of other capabilities, right, in terms of geographic location, time, along with behavior analytics. So going back to the AI question earlier, in terms of how could we use AI for certain things? Well, AI and machine learning to monitor the behavior of components that are accessing or in an automated system is another, I think, down the road kind of great way to go about it. And then the last thing is really continuous monitoring, right? Regularly checking the posture of components, making sure they're up to date, patch, scan, remediated, and that they're following Zero Trust policies. So nice way of saying automated policy enforcement. I'll stop there.
And I guess I would follow up on that, Martin, by stating that, yeah, nobody wants to have to fill out an FSA 13 form for access to an application. You know, it's a pain. You got to do a lot of them, and you know, I used to help process those for our team. And but that's the reality of it right now. So I'm hoping that we can automate that, make it more efficient through AI or whatever the case might be, so that, you know, we streamline a lot of these processes that take so much time, as onboarding and you know, access levels and all that. It's just it's the simple drudge work that would really improve our efficiency and, you know, make us do our jobs better, I think.
All right, perfect. Thank you. So I think we have time to squeeze in one last question. Let's just briefly talk about this before we jump into our takeaways from this conversation. Rudolph, let's start with you. I just want to hear, how is it that your agency is leveraging their CDM experience and investments to help accomplish near-term Zero Trust goals?
Well, as we've discussed here, I mean, we've leveraged ICAMs, multi-factor authentication, a lot of these tools that GSA and CISA have provided us, and DHS. So yeah, we're definitely using as much of the stack as possible, and it's gotten a lot better in the last couple of years. I mean, now you plug your card in and you click one button for the multi-factor authentication. Makes it easy for the user. You can't access applications unless you do that. So, you know, security again has gotten much better. We've leveraged the tools that are out there, and as Ross mentioned, you know, USDA has really been an early adopter in terms of security, and in terms of, you know, creating data strategies for, you know, a 5-year period. We've got like a 5-year outlook for data strategy and how we plan to improve, you know, access to data and who gets access and all that. So, you know, we're working kind of like a smoother commercial enterprise, because I come from, you know, as I mentioned, some big companies. I used to work for Oracle Corporation and so forth. So, you know, they were cutting edge in database and so forth. But I've seen in the government, you got some great people here, some really good minds that are forward thinking and leveraging some great tools out there. So I see things getting better and more efficient as time goes by. And, you know, with people like Ross and Martin to kind of reinforce those, it's going to get just better for us and easier to do our job.
Absolutely. Ross, anything to say to that?
So, yeah, I think, you know, and OMB has been really great in helping agencies map their success for Zero Trust. CIS has done a good job. The colleagues working on the Zero Trust Zero Trust maturity model, letting people know that this is a journey. I'd say that know where your agency is, know where your organization is, use the tools to determine where you are, and then map a plan to the next step, right? Always skate to the next step. So if you are at, if you're at traditional, you get to your first level of initial, right? If you're at initial, you want to move up this scale. Optimal is going to be, when I see people moving to optimal, I think it's going to be more differentiated. I think it's going to be, there'll probably be parts of your environment are going to operate in optimal because they need to, because you actually have very sensitive information, whereas other parts of your environment probably won't need that kind of investment to do those things, right? But you're going to be understanding the differences, right? That's one of the benefits of doing a zero trust analysis and determining what parts how you segment your operating environment, right? Segmentation is really key, and differentiation is what allows segmentation to be valuable. When I was in the Navy a few years ago, I was a submariner, and I remember one of the first things they taught me was, if you try to protect everything at the highest level, you're guaranteed you will protect nothing at the highest level. So we had programs like sub-safe programs that looked at the hull for the ship, and that was different than than the nuclear system, which was another critical system, and that was different than the weapon system, right? And so each of those, they were segments of the environment that you looked at quite critically and very completely, whereas other parts of the ship you didn't look at as much when you were doing inspections and evaluations, right? Because they weren't as critical if a failure occurred in those. And I think that is going to be the same in our environments we're operating in. You're going to have certain parts of it where, Rudolph was mentioning big Oracle database that has a lot of big sensitive information. Yeah, you better be protecting that pretty well, right? But if you have the menu in the lunchroom, that's probably not as important to protect, right?
Thank you. And Martin, last comment here before we move into our final round of takeaways.
My only last comment would say that all the advancements that have been made in terms of transitioning the CDM program from, what was a compliance focused approach to a dynamic, real-time threat responsive framework that can contribute to America's cyber defense strategy is a continuous ongoing effort, and everything that can be supported through AI, through executive orders and OMB policies will only enhance it even greater. There is a binding binding operational directive from CISA June of last year, 2302, that I would encourage folks to take a look at. It does outline very well some of these expectations, and there's a lot of great information in there for anybody that hasn't started down the zero trust road yet.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, so you all have about a minute and a half to share with me, with our audience, what your greatest takeaway from this conversation is. I'm looking forward to hearing from each of you. So Rudolph, how about we start with you? What has been your greatest takeaway from this last hour?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm impressed with what CIS has done for us, and I really look forward to working more closely with you, Ross, and trying to get some more information on some of the nitty-gritty stuff so that I can get a little bit smarter on it. I mean, I'm definitely in the security game here for our properties, our websites, and so forth, but there's a lot more that I could learn and maybe bring to the table and talk to our management about, because I know that a lot of our management, they're so involved in their little projects that they may not see the bigger picture of zero trust or even CDM. So I'm trying to get smarter about it. I think I learned a lot today, and thank you to both Martin and Ross for educating me today.
Absolutely. All right. And Martin, let's go to you next. What's been your greatest takeaway?
I think for me, it's an understanding of an even greater understanding of how far along agencies like the USDA have come. Obviously, I pull a lot from CISA. So Ross, thank you for all your continued efforts and work towards that. Rudolph, from a USDA perspective, as a company and even in other organizations, I think the USDA has really, not just because of its size, scope, budget, and number of personnel, but led the way on a number of initiatives. So I think it was very informative to hear about some of the things you guys have been doing along the Zero Trust lines and CDM aspects. So I appreciate your time today, and it was a privilege to be here.
Thank you. And Ross, we will end with you.
Yeah, it's great. You know, CDM has taken a journey over the last decade, and it'll continue, right? We've focused heavily on the legacy environment, on devices and the basic parts of human identity. You can see that in the future, we're moving in. Network security is going to be something we'll be talking about next. Segmentation is very important to that. And all of this is, and you know, the end game of all this is to protect data, but data protection requires all these other parts to be in place, right? So you'll see CDM will be talking about data protection as well. And I mean, I just appreciate the support I get from agencies. We rely on vendors like Stack Armor to help us lead us. Not only everything we do through vendors, right? So we need to have products and tools that we can put in agencies' houses and help them be successful. And we need those vendors to be forward leaning, right? They need to take us where we need to go, not where we have been, right? So appreciate that to both of you guys. And thanks again to ATARC. Kirsten, it was great being here today.
Yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation. So thank you all so much. And our partners, of course, at Okta for making today possible. And I also want to thank our audience for joining us and submitting questions. So we're really looking forward to seeing you next week at our next event. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their week. And oh, before we go, a final poll question, just asking if you would like to receive your CPE credit. So be sure to fill that out before you log out. All right, everyone, have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rudolph.
Pleasure meeting everybody. Bye
Thanks,
now.
everyone.
Thank you.